All right, let's bring her in. You've seen her on this season of Love is Blind, season 8. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, if you look at it a particular way, she saw her engagement end on last week's episode of Love is Blind to Dave. Very happy to have her on the podcast. It is Lauren Let's bring her in. Lauren, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You know, you are my first Love is Blind interview ever on this podcast.
Oh my gosh.
I'm kind of a late comer. I only started watching in season 6, so I've only seen Charlotte, DC, and now Minneapolis. But I am now a regular, and you're my first guest. So
wow,
this is gonna be good. And you obviously one of the more interesting figures of the season, went through quite a journey on this show. I want to break this interview down into 3 segments: the pods, Honduras, and then back in Minneapolis, and then actually post Minneapolis of now watching the show. So let's start in the pods. I want to know, do you remember how many men you had spoken to before you got to Dave, or was Dave your first one? Do you remember where he was in that lineup on the first day?
Yeah, he was actually my 15th out of 16 guys that day.
Oh, wow. That many?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know there's 16, but wow, he was 15th. So, and we all saw it. They showed it in the teasers. We saw it in the episode. He literally says to you, "How old are you?" "Oh, I'm 30. "Oh, you must not be attractive," or whatever. He said something along those lines. Again, I get what he was trying to do, but in a situation like this, where you can't read body language and you can't actually see a person saying that to you, you were a little taken aback by what we saw. Did it bother you more than it did, or did you just think it was just a poor run at a joke?
I think it was a poor run at a joke. At the time, it felt so much lighter than it's shown in the episode. I mean, it was followed up with a laugh, and we kind of did a little shooting the shit after that. So it felt much more light. That I wouldn't say that was something that screamed, "Oh my God, I actually need to walk out the door right now." Yeah.
But then when you watched the show and you saw this was like some sort of opening line to all the women that he spoke to, or maybe when you got back to the lounge and you guys talked about people that you had conversations with, was it going around that, yeah, there's this guy that keeps making almost insults when we first talked to him, or you didn't know until you saw the episodes?
Honestly, no, because that joke or that line was not even close to some of the weirdest shit that we were hearing from some of the other guys that you don't see a ton of, you probably don't see a ton of them because of that. I was thinking too about how watching it back, you see him say that to a lot of the women, but I was also his 15th. I wonder if he learned a little bit how that joke was or wasn't landing, because you see him when he gets to me, he even says, "I'll be a little nicer to you. Why are you here?" He phrased it differently by the time he got to me. So I wonder if he picked up on some of those things as time went on.
So you're going along with Dave and obviously other men, and we know, the pods last, I believe, right around 10 days. But was there a particular conversation that you had with Dave where either something we saw or something we didn't, where you found yourself going, "Oh, wow, I'm starting to fall for this guy"?
I mean, I honestly don't know if there was one particular thing. You do see there is a clip where we're talking about, I ask him his deepest, darkest secrets, and he's like, "I'm starting to have feelings for you." And he was so validating throughout the pods. And of course, as you see, he validates Molly too. But he was the one that was so consistently starting and ending dates talking about our connection and how he felt about me. And it felt like as time went on, he was being more vulnerable. He was letting himself feel all of these feelings. I think I felt that growth from him a little bit as those days were going on.
So we saw it in the lounge, but with editing and timing, I don't know exactly at what point it occurred. The whole Molly and Dave and Lauren and Dave. We knew that Dave had 2 women, and it was Lauren and Molly. I don't know how much talking goes on. It seems like some women come back to the lounge and freely express sometimes, "Hey, who my number 1 is," or "I really like this guy," or even the way they describe someone they're talking to, maybe someone else can pick up on something like, "Oh, I know who she's talking about." They don't have to name them by name. When did you know that Dave was Molly's number one?
So, yeah, and the girls were not really talking that much about names, especially in the first half of things. So you see when Molly tells me that Dave is her number one, but that was early on. Like that was probably day 3 or 4. And so at the time, Dave, he wasn't, Dave kind of went back and forth between my first and second as time went on. But I had 3 or 4 other connections when Molly told me that. So I remember being like, okay, I like Dave, and like it sucks to hear that she likes him too. But I really didn't at the time see it as like, oh shit, now we got to figure this out. At the time, I was still exploring other options. It wasn't toward the end when Molly had come in and made that comment about like, okay, I think I'm his number one, or he said I'm his number one. And I was like, okay, well, then what's the point of me being here? Because at that point, as of that day, I think the day before, I had ended things with the other guys that I was talking to, or we had parted ways. So it wasn't until that very end when Molly had said that I was like, okay, I actually need to tell Dave how I feel, because I really hadn't up until that point.
So what was the thing that put you over the edge with Dave? What was it that made you end it with the other guys and be like, I want all my eggs in the Dave basket at this point?
I think the biggest thing is it is very emotionally draining to, I guess maybe emotionally draining isn't the best way to describe it, because it is exciting. You're talking to these people about futures and things like that. But it kind of felt like Dave and I were progressing and we're going a lot deeper than like at the time, 2 other guys that I was talking to. I was having fun with the other people I was talking to, but it kind of got to a point that I was like, okay, I could spend 2 hours with each of these guys tomorrow, and be probably pretty tired at the end of the day. Or I could think about what is my strongest connection right now and lean into that the most. And so that's kind of how I got toward the end of, okay, it's Dave.
So when did the breakup with Molly happen? And I mean, it's weird because obviously we know this was a year ago. So I don't even know at the time when you found out he broke up with Molly, maybe, the way she told you, but then watching it back, us were sitting there almost cringing, like he really was trying to put it on her. Or, I mean, we even heard him say like, well, I thought it was clear. And she's like, no, you weren't at all. Like
Right.
when you
Right.
watched his breakup with Molly, is that the way you remember her telling you it went down? Or when you watched it, you were like, oh, wow, that was not the greatest breakup in the world?
It is pretty close to how I remember her telling me. And I will say I was surprised because when you see me talking to Dave and I'm like kind of pouring my heart out, I did not say you need to make a decision. I was just saying, Molly's been telling you how she feels. I haven't really told you how I felt. Cards are on the table. And so when Molly came in, it took me a minute to register for the fact that they had just broken up. Like I thought that they just had a difficult conversation and we were all going to go home and see each other the next day. So she's telling me that he like wanted to pursue things with me. And at the time, this is the thing where I give Molly so much credit, is I could tell that I think she wanted to tell me more, but she didn't want it to hurt me and Dave's relationship. And so she even says at one point, like, promises are made. And I say, you can tell me, but I think she was like doing a really good job. She just didn't want to mess with us at that point, which is way more kinder than she needed to be. It wasn't until after we had left the pods and kind of everything ended where she was telling me how their breakup happened. And she said that he was really trying to get her to say it and she was pushing back a little bit. And then he made that comment like, I thought I just did. And she was like, no.
Well, when the breakup with Molly happens and you've basically established that it's just down to you two, once you got out of it and once you're in Honduras, and we'll go back to the reveal in a second, but once you're in Honduras and based on what he told you in Honduras versus what you ended up seeing on television with the breakup with Molly, did he leave anything out in terms of what he told you of how he ended it? Because I'm sure you didn't talk to Molly. Yeah, you wouldn't have talked to Molly really about it until after you got back to Minneapolis and got settled into your life with Dave, whereas you went to Honduras with Dave. How did he explain his relationship with Molly? Was it a little bit deeper watching it back? Was it deeper than you thought it was? Or how did you feel about the whole, how he told you his relationship with Molly was?
To be honest, we really didn't talk about his relationship with Molly a ton in Honduras or after the fact. Like it really did feel like after we had come together the night that he and Molly broke up, like it was us from there on out. Of course, we talked about it a little in terms of what that conversation sounded like, but all he had really shared is kind of his perspective watching it back. So he probably said, I was telling her that I wanted to be with you, and then she pushed back a little bit, and I said I thought that's what I said. Like he really did tell me his version of things, and it is how he sees it himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. No, I get it. I'm curious, in the pods, obviously the fans see more red flags than probably you do in the pods, but just in the pods part of it, and it might not even have been a major one, but was there any, if you had hesitations about getting engaged to this Dave guy through a wall, what was the red flag sticking out in your head, if you had any? Maybe you didn't.
He didn't know who Cat Stevens was, and that's so concerning to me. No, I'm just kidding. I think that we talk about our families a lot. Obviously, you hear him talk about his sister. And he does mention in the beginning about how like she wasn't super excited about him doing this, and she was worried about it, and she was definitely in the back of his mind.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, I remember like during our engagement, he even says like, I know she's going to love you. I don't care about that anymore. And I remember being like, I love to hear this. However, this is a quick jump. This is still your sister. This is still your family. And so I think knowing how much her opinion on it was weighing on him would have been something that I clocked a little bit sooner.
I can't remember. Did he say in the pods, my sister doesn't want me to get engaged at the end of this thing, but I told her, it's my life, I'm going to live it? Did he say that in the pods or no?
He said that in the pods. No.
Okay. But he did say that did he say his sister is worried that he's going to meet somebody that's just out for clout and Instagram followers and stuff like that?
He didn't say that give me, not even that specific. He was just more of like, my sister is protective and she wants the best for me. And I don't know if she thinks that this experience would be the best way to find someone. Maybe he said it like that.
Okay. One quick thing before we get to the reveal, because I always find this fascinating, because Love is Blind is different than Bachelor, which I cover, because Bachelor just brings in people from all over. And there's a chance that some people might have a past and know each other. You probably didn't know any of the other 15 women once you met them in the lounge, but when you started to talk to them, I got to believe there's got to be somebody where you had mutual friends or a mutual connection.
Totally. We all kind of did. And I remember one of the most bonding moments between me, Sarah, and Taylor is we are between the pods and the getaways, and we had this like 7-hour layover. And so you're just hanging out. I mean, none of us have our phones. And we like made these random mutual friend connections with a high school friend and a college friend, and we just bonded over that. Yeah, I feel like every person on the cast, I could find some kind of second tier connection to them.
Did anybody go to the same high school or same college?
2 girls, Molly and Yemi, had known of each other from dancing, and they had one mutual friend that knew that they were both going on it, but didn't tell either of them. So they were surprised when they showed up the first day. But that's all I know for at least the girls.
Where did you go to college?
Madison.
Oh, you went to UW? Okay. So.
Yeah.
Go Badgers. All right.
Go Badgers.
So the reveal. When you saw him for the first time, number one, did he look like what you thought he would look like? And number two, was he somebody you would typically go for looks-wise?
So I remember saying, like, I tried so hard not to think about what he looked like, but based on the information that I had, I was like, I just know looks like a white Minnesotan. I could just picture it very clearly. And when the doors opened, first of all, they make it seem like you can see them. I could not see him until I was like 3 feet in front of him. Or I think my brain was just like combusting at the time. But he looks like a white Minnesotan. Like, he is exactly what I would have pictured. But I had such a hard time. Like, my brain just could not connect the fact that this was the person that I've been talking to. And I think that combined with it was the first big moment with a ton of cameras. I was anxious, and I feel like you can see that a little bit. I do feel like he's someone that I would be into outside of this. I don't know. He's like a conventionally attractive person. It's not like I would have ran the other way.
Yeah.
But my brain was having a hard time with that.
That's funny. You said he's a white Minnesotan. I think the consensus among the people watching this season is all the guys.
They're all
they all look the same.
Copy
All
paste.
right, so let's go to Honduras, and the first thing I want to ask is it's not even about the relationship. There's two things I want to ask that have nothing to do with your relationship. Number one, watching the episodes back, did you know that he was asking all the other couples if they had sex yet? And number two, how did you feel about, again, watching him back? Maybe you knew at the time, so you can answer that too, or maybe you didn't know until you watched it back. Him telling everybody that she pees a lot. Like, I'm curious to know, did you know about any of this?
Okay, so I'll start with the sex part. It didn't really surprise me. He doesn't filter through his questions or his thoughts. And so
no, he does not.
Seeing that, and like, of course, the whole point of this trip is to figure out everyone's physical connection, like figure out your physical connection as a couple. And so that was like what we're supposed to be talking about and thinking about. And so watching him do that, I'm like, that does not surprise me at all. I feel like that was a very Dave moment. And I do remember, I sat down with all the guys too and kind of talked about me and Dave, and a lot of them brought up, how do you feel about Dave really speaking his mind and saying what he thinks for that filtering? And I remember being like, in terms of our relationship, I'm really never questioning where his head's at. He's always telling me how he feels about things. So I didn't see it as the biggest, most alarming thing in the moment, but it did give me pause to think, what questions are being asked that I'm not aware of?
Yeah.
I'm not, in terms of him telling people that I pee a lot, again, we're having long conversations. That is definitely a thing. Like, we were talking a lot about our sleep habits, and he snores, I pee. It was tough to figure out the dynamic.
Wait, so did you, like, is this a nervous thing? Was this just something that happened in Honduras, or like even today, like every night? Are you getting up 2 or 3 times every night to pee or something like that?
I would say minimum once, but there was definitely a layer of, I just wasn't sleeping that well throughout this whole experience. I'm even now reliving it, I am not sleeping well at all. Like, that is usually the first thing to go for me. So it definitely is like, I'm awake, I can't fall back asleep. What else do I have to do?
Gotta go to the bathroom. All right.
Gotta pee again.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the relationship in regards to Honduras is, you talked about this on your Instagram story, but I want you to relay it to people who didn't see it, was the bikini wax comment. Because people seem to think that you used it as an excuse to get out of having sex with your fiance. Explain to people what happened in that conversation.
Yeah. Paria, can I dive into this too? I know I've talked about it already before, but.
Yeah. Oh, I think you can. Yeah,
okay.
Please do.
Okay, so I will say, to Netflix's credit, I watched this back, and it's pretty accurate in terms of a lot of conversations that we had. Yeah. But this is the one that I'm like, that is actually not what I said. We were talking about how we had a few days between the pods and the getaways, and we could go to appointments or like do things that we wanted to do. And so we were talking about what we've been doing the last couple of days. So I was like, I got my nails done, I got a bikini wax, and I was supposed to go to a spin class. But then mid-bikini wax, they're talking about things that I can't do for 24 hours. And I listed like a bunch of them. One of them is like, get sweaty and work out. And another one is like, have sex. Because again, it would just like mess with everything down there. And so I'm telling him this, and the way that they cut it makes it seem like, oh my gosh, I'm so bummed to not have sex with you. And again, you see this play out, and they talk a little bit about our sex life. And like, the thing that I feel like some people are missing too, and Dave even says this, is like, we were being intimate. It's not like that wasn't happening. It just was like, we weren't having sex at that very moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I needed to clarify that, because I'm like, they did me dirty.
Yeah. Well, I guess, like you said, not the honeymoons, whatever you want to call them, the
getaways.
The getaways. it's where you find out, because obviously you haven't seen this person outside of the reveal, and it's where you find out, like, is there any sort of physical connection? Some people jump into it right away. We've seen that in other seasons. Some people are just like, I need a little more time, which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
But once everything started down in Honduras with you guys, now we talk about red flags down there. I guess the first thing to come up that we all notice as an audience is him saying the friend group thing. He knows, but he didn't have, you don't have your phones yet, right? You don't have your phones until Minneapolis.
Right. Right.
Okay. But he did bring up, people knew you, right?
Yes. Okay. So we had figured this out before cameras were involved. We were like in our little bungalow and we were talking one night, and he was like, did you have a boyfriend before coming on the show? And I was like, no, the last guy that I dated was like a year ago. And he's like, were you talking to someone? And I was like, I have actually been hooking up with this guy for the last couple of months. He knew that I was going through this casting process. And he's like, is his name so-and-so? And drops his name. And I was like, oh my God, how do you know that? And he's like, I actually have a mutual friend with him. And my friends were telling me before coming on that there's a girl going on this show that has a boyfriend. And I remember being like, that's not me. I wonder if there's a different girl that came here with a boyfriend. Like, I'm immediately racking my brain to think about who this could be, not fully making the connection that I'm who he's talking about. And so I kind of went through the backstory with him and the timeline and like who this person was and how I knew him. And he was like, yeah, he really didn't seem to be too fazed by it when we had first discovered this. And then the next day we're on the boat and you see that conversation and he brings it up on camera. And I remember being like, interesting that you're bringing this up on camera. Like, I didn't, there was a part of me that after we had that conversation the night before, I would have never thought we would have ever come back to that. And of course, the fact that that's like our entire downfall and that's the entire story. Yeah. But I do remember being a little surprised that he brought that back up on camera. And then that started the conversation from there.
And I guess that's what confused me, because like you said, there were no phones on the getaways. So it's like, wait, how did he make the connection? And it was basically kind of just a guess. He was saying, before I went on the show, friends had told me there's this girl, and he just, I guess, assumed or wanted to ask if it was you. And that's where I got confused. I was like, wait, how would he have ever heard from friends? But he's saying it was before he even went on the show. Okay.
Yeah. It still is interesting that he thought to ask me that. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's
anyways.
So you end up, obviously, Honduras happens, and then you go back to Minnesota, and your life begins as an engaged couple. And I guess the biggest, one of the things that everybody is talking about is, and we'll just jump to this right now because this pretty much tells the rest of your story, is the guy that you were hooking up with before you left to go film the show. And there's just this balance of, you've got Dave's sister and Dave's friends saying, oh no, that was her boyfriend. We know because we know him. And that's what he's telling us. And then you have you who's telling your fiance, this guy wasn't my boyfriend. And Dave was just having a hard time grasping. And, you know, it's obviously something that he could not get over. And it was something to where if he comes home and his sister and friends don't say anything and don't have this information, it seems like you guys would have been fine. You know, maybe there were other things that could have derailed your relationship. But at that point, the only thing he continuously harps on is this: you were hooking up with somebody before the show. He thought you had sex with them 2 days before you left. You said it was a week before you left. Regardless, here's my take on this. Mm-hmm. You said you were speaking with this, you were hooking up for a couple months with this guy, but you were also going through the casting process. He knew you were going through the casting process. He was also seeing other people at the same time. So I don't know how you could have been in a monogamous, exclusive one-on-one relationship. And I guess it's got to be frustrating for you at the time, and then now having to relive it. Why isn't my fiance believing me? Why is he choosing to believe his sister and his friends when I'm the one that was involved in the relationship, and I am telling him this wasn't my boyfriend? So how did you navigate all that, other than we saw your reaction every time? It just seemed like you were you wanted to bang your head against a wall every time you had a conversation about this.
Yeah, and like I think the thing I keep going back to is like I don't fault Dave for questioning me. I would have also been very confused if the first piece of feedback that I got about my fiance was something along the lines of like a nefarious relationship. I totally understand that. My frustration is like you said, he is hearing from me the first point of contact, like the primary source, and then he's choosing to believe information from second, third, fourth tier people. And again, I was like, I understand, and I'll continue to gather information with you, but let me be part of this conversation because there's some wires being crossed here and some misinformation being spread. And I just want an opportunity to clear it up. Like, let's compare stories. Let's be in the same room together. And so that's where I keep kind of going back to defending even Dave in that way. I get it. This is a very difficult experience. You have to make insanely tough decisions with limited information. Again, he didn't handle it the way he should have, but my frustration was more along the lines of I just wanted the tiniest bit of trust to prove myself.
And he wasn't giving it to you. He really wasn't. And
no.
I'm looking at it and I'm sitting there like, okay, he's not giving it to her. And he also has to take into consideration, maybe he didn't do it, and maybe he just told myself, there's a possibility to be cast on the show. I'm not going to sleep with anybody. But you, as a woman who's going through the casting process, you don't know how many other people you're up against. You might have a 1 in 500 chance of getting cast. What are you supposed to do? Just not live your life, not go out in Minnesota, not have fun, not possibly hook up with a guy that you find attractive and being like, as long as you knew, like I could totally understand Dave's side if you never told the guy in question, oh, by the way, I'm going through this process, and basically sprung it on him at the end and said, oh, by the way, I'm leaving. Peace out. I'm doing on I got cast on a show. But it was open conversation between the both of you. He was seeing somebody else. That's where the disconnect comes in. And that's why I think a lot of people, including myself, just don't understand where Dave is coming from, because you're allowed to live your life before you go on the show. Because like you said, I think you got cast 5-6 days before you entered the pods is when you officially knew you were on the show, right?
And that's the timeline that, sorry.
I was going to say, if that conversation ends up, you get that call from the show that says, Lauren, we've decided to go in a different direction, then you probably just continue seeing this guy, or maybe it ends or whatever. It doesn't matter. But the point is, you would have deprived yourself of at least 2 months of fun because you were holding out hope that you maybe would have been one out of 250 women, or probably thousands of women that apply for the show. I don't even know what the application process is, but see what I'm saying? Like, why would you limit yourself on such a small percentage chance of getting cast on this show?
Yeah, and even that timeline is, I think, important for this story. Is like you said, number one, this other guy was so chill about it, to the point that I'm like, does he even care? Like, it didn't really seem like he did at the time, which I was, again, best of both worlds for all of us. And I remember telling Dave, like, he was hearing that we were hooking up like the weekend before. And I was like, no, it was like over a week before I left for the pods. And then we left for the pods on a Sunday. I didn't find out that I was going to be on it until Monday, like the Monday before. So I did not hook up. I did not sleep with him when I had found out it was official. I was going on it. At that point, I was just being told, we'll let you know, we'll let you know, we'll let you know. And I even tell this, but like I even tell Dave this, I had seen that guy at some point throughout the week. After I'd been told that I was for sure going on it, we got ice cream together. I know that we were like friends with benefits, but I honestly thought he was like a buddy of mine. So we got ice cream, and he was telling me about this Hinge date that he went on the night before. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad we're on the same page about this. Like, I'm so glad that you're exploring other options. I'm obviously going to go explore other options. It really almost validated how I was feeling about this very casual relationship and how he was feeling about it. And so, yeah, I truly, going into this, never would have thought this would even have been a conversation based on that timeline, everything I knew about things. And I also had a hard time wrapping my mind around why it was the end all be all.
Yeah, it really obviously derailed things. And us as the viewers are sitting at home just being like, why can't he get over this? I think Dave even said at one point, I'm mad at myself for not being able to get over this. I think he said that in a conversation with you. And then we're all sitting at home screaming like, yeah, dude, exactly. Why can't you get over this? Well, she is your fiance now. Like, she doesn't want to be with the friends with benefits guy. She wants to be with you.
Right. And that was the other, like, I think frustrating is you see him kind of go back and forth. And that's how I felt at the time too. It really did feel like emotional whiplash, because the only time we were having these conversations about this other guy was when the cameras were rolling. He wasn't really helping me or like trying to figure things out outside of that. And if anything, outside of that, I mean, he even made a comment a couple of days before we broke up, like, I'm just really overwhelmed with everything right now. I don't really give a shit who you slept with. And that was like hours before we go into the conversation with my mom. And then things are fine. And so I just remember, and then we're bowling, and he brings it up when we're bowling. And I've thought so many times, if you wanted to problem solve this with me, we would have done this in another way, not on camera every time you need to come back to something.
Side note, speaking of bowling, the fact that this guy won't put his fingers in a bowling ball should be grounds for breaking up with him immediately. That should have been a giant red flag, other than Cat Stevens, that this guy won't put his fingers in a bowling ball. Come on.
He's too cool for that.
It's like, okay, you want to throw the ball down and hold it like a 6-year-old child trying to bowl? Go ahead.
Yeah.
You look like an idiot. One conversation that we didn't get to see, but we heard you guys talk about, was his conversation with your dad. Can you elaborate more on how the conversation with your dad went? And your dad just didn't want to be on camera, right? Was that the thing?
Right. My dad is I think was very protective of me and of this relationship. And I think he really wanted to meet us and meet Dave and see us together and express how he felt, without being worried about like how things would be edited and what would be shown. But he really wanted to meet Dave. I mean, my parents drove into town, stayed for the weekend so that they could meet him. And we actually met them twice. We met them for drinks one night, and honestly, it went well. My dad, we've talked recently, and he was like, I liked Dave. I thought he answered questions really well. It was like fun to see you guys together. He said a couple of things that made me question if he was fully ready for marriage, but I liked you guys. And so the next day we got coffee, and before they were going to leave town. And I think my dad was just more like, before you marry someone, make sure you're 100% right. One of the things that Dave said to my dad that he didn't really like is how we were talking about, I haven't met anyone from Dave's family. And Dave was like, well, my dad's really busy. He golfs, he's traveling. And my dad was like, I'm really busy, but this is the most important thing in the world to me right now. And we know our daughter, and it hurts our heart to have you not have her meet your people. And I think it was just like, again, there weren't a lot of people being really explicit and calling Dave out about that at the moment. And so I think he got defensive and didn't want to hear that. And I think that rattled him a little bit.
So was Dave's plan? I mean, I guess I'm trying to get inside of Dave's head, but I feel like that's like a game of kickball going on in there. So I don't really want to try and understand him, but it just seems like I don't understand what his plan was. If he was truly going to marry you and truly going to propose and, say yes at the altar with you, at some point you had to meet his friends and his sister. And he just kept saying, like, was his reason? Actually, I'm going to ask you, what was his reason that he kept giving you as to why he wasn't going to let you meet his sister and his friends or his family?
At the time, he kept telling me I can't force them to do anything. I can't force them to be here. It wasn't until the breakup conversation where he says, well, if I really wanted them here, they'd be here. But up until that point, all I had heard was they have questions about you and they don't want to be involved if it's not going to be endgame, I guess, if that's how I'm remembering things.
Yeah.
That was all I was being told at the time. So I was even like, can we call each other? Can we text each other? Like, any communication at that point, I would have welcomed.
That had to have been frustrating, because I'm assuming, just by what we've seen in the episodes, every other couple was meeting people from families. I mean, some were not wanting to be, on camera, but there was everybody was meeting the people that they needed to meet before they made a decision on whether or not they were going to say yes to a marriage with somebody. Like, you were the only couple, you were the only person that didn't get to meet important people on your fiance's side. And it just was very, very confusing. I didn't understand it. I don't think anybody understands it. And then we find out. So in last week's episode, you have your breakup, which was in a movie theater, which is kind of funny. It's just you go from a bowling alley, and I heard you say in an interview, like, yeah, we just didn't want to do it in the bowling alley, so we moved to a theater where I think people thought people kept walking in and interrupting you guys.
Yeah. Not the most ideal location for a breakup, but it's fine.
Did you think going into that conversation you were going to walk out of there broken up, or would you think it was just going to be a, hey, we need to dive into some serious stuff? But did you have any inclination that that conversation was going to end in the ending of your engagement?
So going into bowling, no. But then as soon as we pivoted, where he said, I'm not going to waste their time. And then I was like, then what are we doing here? And then we moved into the movie theater. I knew when we walked into this movie theater, that was going to be the end of things. It's funny too. I remember we were like in this public place bowling, and we're walking by this group of people, and they knew that we were filming because they had to sign some kind of release. And this woman was like, good luck, you guys. I'm rooting for you. And I remember being like, this is not ending well. I knew in that moment that we were going down.
Well, so you sit down and you have that conversation, and, you know, it takes a turn. He ends it. I don't want to say it was kind of the way he ended it with Molly, but it wasn't, he didn't put his foot down. It seemed like he was just kind of like, yeah, I guess we don't continue this anymore. And here you are just like, how in the world did this almost get to this point? Yeah. After the breakup, you had said that you had written a letter to his sister, but he never gave it to her. When did you write this letter? Can you give us just the basics of the content of this letter? And do you know why he never gave it to her?
So I wrote the letter, oh my gosh, I don't know, probably, okay. Sometime the week before,
okay,
I wrote a letter because I knew we had a night that we weren't going to be filming, and he went to go to his family to have dinner, and I had like a Zoom call with my family. And I spent the day writing this letter. It was like a 4-page handwritten letter. And it just talked about, like, I think Dave kind of expressed that his sister was worried that none of this was real. And so I just wanted to reiterate, like, these are my real feelings. This is how we got here. I'd love to be part of the conversation. I know that there's a lot of conversations happening. There's a lot of judgments being made, but I just would like to chat with you. And then I put my phone number. And I did tell him, this is your sister and your family, but like, this would mean a lot for me to pass this along. And then he goes to dinner, and he came back. And the next day, I truly had a gut feeling. I was like, I bet he didn't give it to her. And it was sitting in his jacket pocket when he got home. And I don't know, I think he didn't give it to her. And I think he didn't want us to meet because I think that would have made this process much more real. And I don't think he was ready to go through any of the next steps. I think he had made his mind up about things much earlier than he had really like let on with me, and was kind of going through the motions a little bit. But if those other things would have fell into place, if family would have been involved and friends would have been involved, it would have forced him to almost be the bad guy and make some final decisions and figure things out.
When we were watching it, a lot of the sentiment online and from the people who have commented about your relationship is it really does seem like Dave doesn't want to be the bad guy, and he's pushing Lauren away as much as he can. So she'll just be like, God, enough. I can't do this anymore, and put it on you so he doesn't look like the bad guy. In the moment, did you feel like that's what was happening?
A little bit, but like, there's so many hours that we spend together, both on and off camera. Yeah. So, you know, you're watching this, and even as a viewer, it's hard to watch because if I was only making decisions about this person based on what I'm seeing on the show, of course, I would be like, why didn't she break up with this guy 3 days ago? But there were other conversations being had and like connections we were having and validating emotions and things. So it felt like that a little bit, especially towards the very end when it was the only conversation that we kept coming back to and the only conversation that was really seeing frustration from both of us. But I don't know if I fully felt it as much at the time as I do watching it back now.
Yeah, that makes sense because like you're just having to relive it now. It's kind of be a bizarre experience, but I think one of the biggest telling things to me was Molly's conversation with him at, what's it called? Buck Hill? Is that the name of it?
Buck Hill. Good
Buck Hill.
memory.
Yeah. So Buck Hill happens, and that's where everybody meets up. Some of the singles are brought back, and Madison's there, and Alex is there, and Mason and Meg, and Molly shows up, and Molly has this conversation where she pulls Dave aside, and again, it's all about this whole friends with benefits thing that you have going into this. And my sister, man, she's not going to approve. But again, he told Molly specifically, you know, I know my sister doesn't want me to get engaged, but fuck it. No one's telling me what to do. This is my life. This is what I want, which is great. But then he didn't follow through with it because he listened to his sister and friends. He had them on one shoulder saying, not good. He had you on the other shoulder saying, there's nothing serious there. I didn't have a boyfriend. And Molly is telling him, and the way I was looking at it was just like, why wasn't his stance to his sister and his friends, look, I understand your trepidations about all this. I understand you have hesitations. I get it. But you were not there in the pods with me for 10 days. You don't know how many hours upon hours I spent talking to this woman and falling in love with this woman, asking her to marry me. I did this because I felt it with her. And I understand you guys have problems with it, but if you would just get to know her and if you would just speak with her, you would understand and you would fall in love with her like I have. And I just don't understand why that wasn't his case, other than, you know what, Lauren, I can't get over this. I can't get over this guy that you were hooking up with before the show. It makes me think, and now looking back on it and then seeing an interview that Dave did recently where he basically said, I was going to say no at the altar. So now we know this guy was never going to marry you. And
yeah.
Now I got to ask you, did you think that was the case, that he never wanted to marry you?
My AirPods just died.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can hear it. Yeah, I can hear you.
Is the sound going to be, my AirPods just died. Is the sound going to sound different?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm only hearing the problem is I'm almost hearing myself in my ear a little bit. No, it went away. Okay, so yeah, put the AirPods away. So basically what I'm saying is, let me write down a timestamp on this so I can just edit that part out a little bit. 42. Edit. Okay. So my question is now, after Dave's doing this interview and basically saying, no, I was going to say no at the altar. Did you feel that at the time? Were you under the impression that this guy was going to say yes, or you got to a point where it's just like, no, he's not going to say yes to me?
I totally got to a point where I'm like, he's not going to say yes. I think at the end of the day too, like all of those actions of him not letting me be involved in these conversations spoke to him not being ready to be married. This didn't feel like a priority that he was willing to sacrifice for, which again, it's crazy to be like, I didn't think that I was asking him to sacrifice that much. I do think that there is a part of him that wanted to be ready for this, that wanted to be leaning into this experience in the way that would have led to a marriage. But I just think ultimately at the end of the day, he still had so much growth and healing to do, and he just wasn't ever going to get there.
So after this all happens, and then, as I said, the bizarre experience of this whole process is, in the Bachelor world, there's about a 4-month turnaround from time filming ends to the time episodes or time finale night airs. You guys have a whole year. So you deal with this last February and March. You're obviously like, wow, went on the show, broken engagement. In real time back then, how long did it take you to get over a broken engagement?
I've thought about this a lot because like the coolest thing about this experience, it was so quick. Like I developed feelings for someone quicker than I ever have in my life. But it also then meant on the other end of things, I processed through this so quickly. Like within days, I got so much more clarity looking back and seeing things differently. I will say it still took me a few months to fully wrap my mind around everything that happened. I mean, it just felt like there was so much going on at the time and like so many different moving pieces, but I really saw things differently within days of us ending and him not reaching out, and it allowed me to move on a lot more quickly than any other breakup I've had.
And then obviously you're allowed to live your life after this. You're not allowed to, it's not like you hey, you can't leave the house, you can't date, we can't see, you're allowed to do this. Have you dated? Did you ever connect with anybody from this show post filming?
So yes, I I ended up, one of the guys that I was talking to towards the end too, that we had ended things before I decided to pick Dave, was Scott from the pods, and we talked for a little bit last summer. So probably like 6 months after Dave and I broke up, he had reached out and we had went on a few dates, hung out for like a couple months or so. Ultimately, we are just like very good friends. I have nothing but amazing things to say about him. And even to this day, we're very good friends. But no, other than that, I've dated on and off otherwise, but I do think that I knew what was coming and I knew that I was going to have to relive this experience. And so I decided to take a little break from dating for the past few months.
So not to bring up this guy again, but I just want to, make it clear. I'm just curious, and I know the audience is probably curious. The Friends with Benefits guy before the show, he's really inserted himself into the narrative, putting out promo videos of himself, making a cast photo of himself. The whole thing is just bizarre. But when that is happening during filming, this guy ended up being in the same building as you and Dave. So that was discussed on the show, but here now, or ever since filming ended, has there ever been anything? Did you ever pick back up with that guy, or did you officially put your foot down and just say, I don't even want to get back into this with you? Like, where did you ever leave off with that guy once filming was over and once your engagement was over?
Yeah. So he had reached out like throughout last spring, and I was so still like pissed at the whole situation.
Yeah.
I did end up having a conversation with him last summer, but it was more to be like, dude, what the fuck? Like, I can't believe you put me through that. But that was really it. I mean, truly, when I left for the pods, I did not think I didn't think I was never gonna see him again, but I really did feel like that was the end of our time together. And obviously then the way things shook out, I had lost any interest in any of that.
Have you ever run into him in Minnesota circles out and about?
No, hadn't really run into him. I feel like he doesn't, he's also moved since then, but he doesn't really bop around in Minneapolis the way that.
Have you run into Dave? Do you see him out and about?
Yeah, here and there.
Is it weird? Is it awkward?
We honestly, for the last year, usually don't talk to each other.
Okay, so if you're at the same bar as Dave, wherever it is, does he approach you? Do you approach him, or you just acknowledge that you're both there and you don't even try and speak to each other?
We've had a couple conversations, but they're like, I don't know, like drunken bar conversations. Nothing of like substance. But otherwise, for the most part, we do ignore each other. Like, I've become so close with other people from the cast that I spend a lot of time with. And so he's also just someone that I wasn't going to go out of my way to interact with.
Okay, and then finally, just want to wrap with this. As I said, filmed it a year ago. It now airs now. You got over it pretty quickly. But then a year later, you have to go through this, and you have to deal with social media comments, and you have to deal with people giving their opinions on your situation. I think most of it has been in pro Lauren, and it's been mostly anti Dave out there, but just having to relive this experience and watch it back again. What emotions do you get when you watched all the episodes? Were you angry? Were you frustrated? Were you sad? Were you mad? Were you happy? Like, what does someone who has to relive a broken engagement 1 year later feel about all this?
I'm so thankful for the fact that it's been a year, because I do feel very emotionally removed from it for the most part. I still like shed some tears watching some of the frustrating conversations, but it was, I think, more of just seeing my disappointment as the time went on. Like, I was so excited and so sure about him at certain moments. And then to see me like slowly fade out of that is like sad for me to watch, more so for my own heartbreak and my own, like, I don't know, loss. I will say though, I think it's been harder on my friends and family because they obviously knew what I was going through, but they weren't in front of the camera. They weren't in those scenes. And so they're now watching me getting just absolutely heartbroken. And like my sister-in-law had reached out and been like, I just didn't know it was that bad. And like, I wish I had supported you differently, but I'm like, no, I would have express to anyone what I knew at the time, but I think it's just hard for them to see how painful it actually was playing out.
Well, I mean, it was great television. You're probably the most talked about couple this season on Love is Blind. Unfortunately, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you, but I think a lot of people are probably happy it didn't work out for you. And I think you, looking back on it now, probably realize that Dave was not your man in the long run. And I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah,
right?
It wasn't the ending I wanted at the time, but it was definitely the ending that I needed.
That you needed. Exactly. So, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on. First Love is Blind interview. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything. Stay away from the friends with benefits guy if he happens to pop back into your life at any point. And again, thanks again so much for coming on. We'll be in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks.